If God struck an entire nation of people with tumors and killed them all, would you describe that as an amazing and glorious thing that God did? Probably not, but that is exactly how the author of 1 Samuel described this exact situation. Now, the hand of Yahweh, the Lord, was glorious against the Ashdodites, and he made them desolate and struck them with tumors, both Ashdod and its territory. Once again, verse 9, the hand of Yahweh was against the city, Gath, with very great confusion. Does that mean God is the author of confusion? He struck the men of the city, both young and old, so that tumors broke out on them. Once again, this is glorious. These are descriptions in the Bible of bad things happening to people, and God is the one who is actively causing them to happen. And not only that, but it's glorious that it's happening. I hear so often from Christians, God never gives anyone any disease ever. That's not part of his will, they say. However, the scriptures don't teach that. In fact, it teaches the opposite, that God is sovereign. He upholds every atom in existence and moves them wherever they need to go. And I honestly think it's kind of silly to think that God somehow couldn't have stopped a virus from entering my body. I mean, he literally controls the weather. How can I believe that he can cause a tornado to come this way or to go that way, and not also believe that he can control a small gust of wind so that an airborne virus goes this way rather than in my lungs? I just got sick last week. I'm just now getting over it. I recognize that that is 100% part of God's plan for my life. And by God's grace, I will still believe that the next time I get sick and the next time I experience any type of suffering in my life. The reason why I believe this is because Jesus himself did. When Peter cut off the ear of the high priest's slave, Jesus said, "Put the sword into the sheath, the cup which who has given me?" Was it the devil who gave it to Jesus? Was it the wicked, terrible Jews or the Gentiles of that time? No, it was God himself. Surely if the only begotten Son of God recognized that his Father gave him that suffering, which was much worse suffering that I've ever experienced, surely the rest of God's sons should have that same humility. So when it comes to whether or not God created evil, it depends on what you mean by evil and what you mean by create. We're going to go over all that in this video, but mainly this question comes from Isaiah 45:7, specifically in the King James Version. And for some context, this is God speaking to Cyrus, the Persian king, whose right hand I have holden to subdue nations before him. So God is raising up the Persian Empire to go and subdue the other nations. However, this also comes with a warning to Cyrus. I am the Lord, there's no one else, there's no God besides me. So God's raising up Cyrus, giving him power, but at the same time reminding him, I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. Now, let's just switch to a modern translation, and pretty much all the modern translations translate this as producing peace and creating calamity rather than evil. The reason why is because the word ra'ah in Hebrew has a lot of different meanings, but it is the standard word for evil or bad and can even describe bad tasting food. And in this context, God forms light, creates darkness, produces peace, and the opposite of peace, which is calamity. So this verse, even in the King James Version, does not require you to believe that God is active in the world producing evil thoughts in the heart of men to do evil things. If that were true, that would mean that God is the father of lies and the author of evil, and he himself is evil. And a lot of people want to believe that God is evil, so a lot of people choose to believe that and suppress the truth. But there still are questions about how God is sovereign and controlling everything, yet also he is not forcing people to do evil. Let's look at Job chapter 2, where similar thing is said. This is after God allows Satan to strike Job and his family, and his wife said to him, "Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die." But he said to her, "You speak as one of the wickedly foolish women speak. Shall we indeed accept good from God and not accept bad?" Or calamity. Once again, the KJV translates this as evil. Shall we not receive evil from God? And even a modern translation like the ESV still translates it as evil. Now, we just read in chapter 1 and chapter 2 that all these evil things came from Satan. It was Satan who struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. So, was this evil that came upon Job from God or from Satan? The text teaches that it is both. How we understand this is actually pretty simple. On God's part, he is the one who literally allows Satan to do these things, who has power. Satan literally cannot do a single thing unless God allows it to happen. So in that way, it is from God that these terrible things happen to Job. So God's good intentions towards his servant Job and everyone who's going to read this and benefit from it, whereas Satan, he has evil intentions in doing all this. Now, another verse that is extremely hard to swallow for us is Isaiah 63:17. Why, O Yahweh, do you cause us to stray from your ways and stiffen our heart from fearing you? Why does God cause us to stray from his ways, aka disobey him? Why does God do this? Why do you stiffen our hearts as a people, as a nation, from fearing God? We know God is sovereign. We know he can change hearts and cause us to obey him. Why does he do this? Now, I read this verse sometimes and people think that I'm teaching, or that Isaiah is teaching, that God is the one active in people's hearts, forcing them to disobey him for his glory and purposes so he can display his wrath and everything. That's not it. You read this: return for the sake of your slaves, the tribes of your inheritance. So it's actually not God's activity that causes people to do evil and stray from his ways. It's actually God's lack of activity in people's hearts. It's God giving them over to the desires of their hearts. As Romans chapter 1 says, God gave them over in the desires of their hearts to impurity so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. God gave them over to dishonorable passions, for their females exchanged the natural function for that which is unnatural. And in the same way, the males abandoned the natural function of the female and burned in their desire toward one another, males with males, committing indecent acts and receiving in their own persons the due penalty of their error, which is death. Now, Revelation chapter 17 also explains this perfectly, better than I can, where it's talking about the Roman Empire versus Israel. And we know how the Roman Empire came in and destroyed Israel in the 60s and 70 AD. For God gave it in their hearts to do his purpose, both by doing their own common purpose and by giving their kingdom to the beast until the words of God will be finished. And this happens multiple times in the Bible, by the way. Babylon comes in, destroys Israel. Same thing with the Assyrians and, the Roman Empire. These are simply bloodthirsty people who want to take over the world. They want power. Now, God gives that in their hearts to do that. And on God's part, it is to judge the nation of Israel. And of course, that is not the intention of the Romans or the Babylonians or anyone else. Now, I think the most important verse for understanding this is Genesis 50:20. This is after Joseph is sold into slavery and he becomes a slave for many years and then rises to power and then reunites with his brothers who were the ones who sold him into slavery. And he says to them, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to do what is happening on this day to keep many people alive." So, sinful man intends evil action against Joseph, but God meant it. What's the it here? The evil action against Joseph for good. With this, we can confidently believe that every single sin that is happening today is being intended by God for good. And notice how it does not say that God turned it around for good, or that he didn't intend it at all for any of this to happen, but then he made it good. He made it turn out okay for Joseph and his family. That's how many people would understand that verse, but that's not what it says. It says God meant evil for good. Not that he never planned for any of this to happen at all the way it happened, but he turned it around for good. So, did God create evil? It depends on your definition of create. If by create you mean that he is actively in the hearts of people and Satan to force them to do evil, the answer is no, of course not. That would make God the source of evil. And if you mean by create that he lets people do evil and that's part of his plan, then yes, of course, it is part of God's plan to temporarily allow sinners to do evil for the demonstration of his glory. And one last point is that there's multiple definitions of evil as well. Sometimes in the Bible, evil is actually talking about human evil. They're doing evil actions, and sometimes it's describing just disease or natural disasters. And in the case of those disasters like hurricanes and earthquakes and all that, the answer undoubtedly 100% is yes, of course. God creates that calamity, that bad. And that's something that shouldn't be controversial if you believe in Jesus. He has power over the weather. In fact, he is the one that is actively controlling the weather and in all places around the world. And with all that being said, this should inspire great confidence in the God that we worship, rather than crazy accusations of God being evil, or that he should be more merciful, and that it's not fair that he's creating people and doing what he wants with them. That's literally the clay criticizing the potter. It's not a good idea. So practically what this means for us is exactly what it meant for the early church. Acts chapter 4. Truly in this city they were gathered together against your holy servant Jesus, whom you anointed, both Herod and Pontius Pilate, along with the Gentiles and the peoples of Israel, to do whatever your hand and your purpose predestined to occur. Guys, we have Herod and Pilate, Gentiles and peoples of Israel, to do whatever God's hand predestined to occur. All of these people doing evil things against Jesus was predestined by God. That's what it says. It's just a fact. And now, Lord, take note of their threats and grant that your slaves may speak your word with all confidence, while you extend your hand to heal, and signs and wonders happen through the name of your holy servant Jesus. Having a sovereign God means that we are able to go wherever we want to and not be afraid. You can get thrown into a lion's den and know that whatever happens is God's plan, and it's all for your benefit, actually. You can get sold into slavery and chained up and beaten and thrown into prison unjustly, and you can know that all of this was planned by God before you even existed, and you are more valuable to him than your children are to you. And if you don't have children, your parents or your friends or anyone else that you love. Anyways, please remember to like and subscribe if you have not already. That's gonna be it for today. Love you guys so much.